Welcome back. In a major ruling that has a global impact, the International Court of Justice has ordered Israel to halt its attack on Rafah. In its ruling, the World Court said it was not convinced that the evacuation of Rafah and other measures by Israel are sufficient to alleviate the suffering of Palestinians. Israel has been ordered by the International Court of Justice to open the Rafah border crossing for humanitarian assistance. It has also ordered Israel to allow access to the Gaza Strip for investigators. The ICJ told Israel that it must submit a report on measures taken within 1 month. On Monday, the ICC's prosecutor's office requested arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense chief Yoav Gallant, as well as for 3 Hamas leaders for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. The ruling against Israel could damage the country's international reputation, but the important question is, can ICJ rulings be enforced? In March 22, the court had ordered Russia to immediately halt its military campaign in Ukraine, which Russia did not abide by. To understand the impact of the ruling, we're joined by former diplomat KP Fabian and human rights lawyer Lysandra Novo, who has experience working at the International Court of Justice. Lysandra, let me begin by asking you, do you think these measures, including asking Israel to halt the Rafah offensive immediately and allow humanitarian assistance to pass, will this have any impact on Israel, even though it may not go ahead and implement the order?
I think that's a great question, and in great part depends on the international community's response. As you noted, the International Court of Justice doesn't have its own enforcement mechanism. When there is a question about enforcement, this can be elevated to the United Nations Security Council, but of course, with the United States as a permanent member, it's unlikely to have any result. However, this order by the court is legally binding on Israel, and therefore, if it does not comply, it's in breach of an international obligation. And that should really compel states that are giving it assistance to rethink their approach to how they want to support Israel as this conflict continues.
Right. Let me also get in Ambassador Fabian, somebody who tracks the Middle East very closely. Ambassador Fabian, the court, the ICJ, has said that Israel must allow investigators to enter Gaza, and evacuation efforts in Gaza are not sufficient. The situation in Rafah is absolutely disastrous. A few days ago, you had the International Criminal Court's prosecutor seeking arrest warrants against Hamas and Netanyahu. Before that, you had the likes of Norway, Spain, recognizing Palestine as a country. How do you think all these measures put together put pressure on Israel and also on the likes of the United States, which have been backing Israel in its every endeavor?
Thank you. Glad to be with the Global Eye. I agree with Lysandra that the ICJ has no enforcement mechanism, and the matter can be brought to the Security Council, and we know what the United States will do. But it's also possible for the matter to be then taken to the General Assembly. Again, the General Assembly will pass a resolution which again can't be enforced. But the key point made by her is that the political pressure will increase exponentially. And that is important. And just one more point. The court said not only should Israel halt its operations, but withdraw from the enclave. That's very important. And as you mentioned, the court has ordered Israel to give, access to for a fact-finding mission and all that, but also for for humanitarian assistance to go there. And it has given Israel 1 month, which I think is not justified. After all, human beings are getting killed. So why 1 month? I would say that the court has given the correct judgment, but it has taken a lot of time. Remember, South Africa took the matter to the court in December last year. So, court has done the right thing, but rather late. But let us see what happens, because Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu is hell-bent on doing what he wants to do, primarily because if the war ends, he might find himself in jail within a couple of days. And President Biden lacks the authority he lacks the responsibility to use his presidential authority.
Important points there, Ambassador Fabian. Let me go back to Lysandra as well. Now, Lysandra, as far as the powers of these two courts is concerned, International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court, tell us, what is the real difference between the enforcement powers? The Office of the Prosecutor at the ICC has sought arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and other Hamas leaders. What really happens next in this case?
Thank you for asking that. I think this is really a big misunderstanding that people have between these two courts. So the International Court of Justice is a court between states. And that's why it's South Africa that has brought this case rather than individuals. And what the International Court of Justice does is it finds when states are in breach of their international obligations. It is not a criminal court, and it cannot sentence anyone or find anyone criminally responsible. And it won't even find a state criminally responsible, right? There's a big difference between being responsible for violating a treaty obligation, such as those under the Genocide Convention, and being criminally responsible. Now, the International Criminal Court is a court of individual criminal responsibility. And so its job is really to investigate alleged crimes and to assess whether particular individuals are responsible for having committed these crimes. And as you mentioned, the Office of the Prosecutor has requested arrest warrants. This does not mean that they have been issued. The pretrial chamber has to now consider the request that has been put forth by the prosecutor and decide whether the standard has been met to issue the arrest warrants. At this particular stage, that standard is reasonable grounds to believe, which means that a reasonable person would believe that maybe the people that have been accused could have committed these crimes and an investigation is warranted. However, the ICC, like the ICJ, also does not have its own enforcement mechanism. It depends on the states parties to the Rome Statute. And in this case, even if the pretrial chamber does approve the request and does issue warrants for the Israeli leaders and for the Hamas leaders that the prosecutor has requested these warrants for, really their only enforcement is if these particular individuals travel to countries that are bound by the court to enforce these warrants and detain them. So for the case of Israel, for example, most European states would be bound as parties to the Rome Statute to arrest Netanyahu or the defense leader that the warrant has been requested for if they travel. However, the United States is not a party to the Rome Statute, and therefore the United States is not under any legal obligation to arrest these individuals. When it comes to the leaders for Hamas, for example, one of them is situated in Qatar, which is not a party to the Rome Statute, and therefore they can travel to this state as well without any repercussions, even if the trial chamber approves the warrants.
So that's important. It'll become difficult for Netanyahu to travel to states which accept the jurisdiction of the ICC in case the court, the criminal court, issues an arrest warrant against Netanyahu and other Hamas leaders. Ambassador Fabian, coming to you. We have Biden and the U.S. Secretary of State actually agreeing with U.S. lawmakers to say that we will look at legislations where we can put sanctions on the ICC. How do you see this move by the United States? Do you think it's unprecedented and it really derails international law in one sense?
No, I believe in the past, Trump had put some sanctions and Biden sort of, lifted them. So this is not unprecedented. But what we have to recognize is that in Washington, they seem to believe that for every situation, there is one panacea, that is sanctions. Now, I'm afraid that proposition needs examination. If you sanction ICC officials, even the judges, well, that means they cannot come to the United States or if they have any funds there, those funds can be frozen. But now they have to remove the funds and they will not be coming to the United States. So it's an empty gesture just to take care of, public opinion. That gives the impression that we are acting.
Right, just to give an impression that we're acting. Coming to you, Lisandra, what are some of the other legal steps that can be taken by countries who are absolutely against what United States is doing, what Israel is doing in Gaza? Can international aid agencies and bodies approach any other jurisdiction to put pressure on Israel or Hamas for that matter?
That's a complicated question. I think it really depends on the specifics of what you're looking at. But one thing that many states can do, and these are typically the same states that are party to the Rome Statute and to the International Criminal Court, is they can exercise something that's known as universal jurisdiction. And that is when a domestic court in a country starts an investigation or a prosecution over international crimes, such as, for example, war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide, no matter where they've been committed or by whom. There have been famous instances of universal jurisdiction cases in the past. One is open right now in Argentina, for example. On the Myanmar situation, Europe has held several European countries. Germany prolifically has had a lot of trials related to the conflict in Syria. And so depending on the particular requirements of these countries, for example, some require perpetrators to travel there, they could start cases against either Israeli leaders or Hamas leaders present on their territory for some of these crimes. Now, international organizations aren't really built to deal with accountability. I think they can really assist in issuing political pressure, but it's hard for them to deal with the current situation that we're facing. However, states can support these organizations. They can support humanitarian organizations seeking to get aid into Rafah, into other parts of Gaza. They can try to demand that these organizations get better access, not just at these checkpoints, but once inside the territory to deliver it where it's greatly needed.
Right. Thank you very much, Lisandra, for joining us. And I'd like to thank Ambassador Fabian as well. One thing is for sure, as both our panelists pointing out, that this definitely puts more political pressure on Israel. Let's see what happens in the days to come. There's also some more important development coming in, and this is with regard to the Russia-Ukraine war. According to a Reuters report, Russian President Putin is ready to halt the war in Ukraine with a negotiated ceasefire that recognizes the current battlefield lines. The report quotes 4 Russian sources who said Putin is also prepared to fight on if Kyiv and the West do not respond. So that leaves us with a lot to think about over the weekend. Let's see if this really paves the way for the war in Ukraine, at least one war in the world, to come to an end. With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18. The news continues on the other side.